Good morning. I'm Denise O'Malley, the founder of You Define Wellness, and thank you for joining us for another edition of An Apple a Day. These are webinars that we host with the experts to help you with wellness of your business, your body, or your life. So today I am really excited to have one of the You Define Wellness Network providers, Robin Miner, joining us to talk to us about embodied counseling. And Robin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So let's kind of jump right in so that and set the stage for the whole conversation. Can you summarize for us what is embodied counseling?
It's a great question, and I always pause because even after all this time, I still have a little trouble describing it.
Okay.
So it goes back to what is embodiment. And embodiment is really being present with whatever our experience is. So being present with our thoughts, our emotions, our physical experience, and beyond that, maybe an energetic sense or a felt sense of whatever is happening. So embodied counseling is then being with that entire experience of whatever is happening in the moment. So traditional counseling would be talking about something.
Right.
Something happened. Here's how I felt about it. In embodied counseling, we start with that. That's just the beginning. And then we pause and say, okay, that's the story. Now, what's happening right now? How do you feel about that? What emotions come up right now? What's your physical sense of that right now? What's the energy of it right now? What's your physical sense? What's your felt sense of it right now? And we work with that because that has information. So somebody might say, oh, I feel tense. And we might look at that and say, really, so where is that tension? My hands feel tense. And, oh, I'm so sorry, let me turn that off. My hands feel tense, and we might look at, just pause with that tension in the hands and say, well, if your hands could speak, if the tension in your hands could speak, what would it say? And by just staying with that experience, we start to get all kinds of information that the person didn't have before.
Okay, so this one word comes to mind. You're using embodiment. I deal in the corporate wellness arena, and the buzzword right now is mindfulness. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like it's very similar.
Yes.
Because you are having to be really mindful of what the experience is at the moment.
Yes. Okay.
So, I never know where these are going to go, and I don't prepare the questions ahead of time because I want the free form of it. Tell me, what attracts someone to working with you? What is it that you see that's going on in their lives that they want to move to this level of counseling?
It's a great question. I think typically my clients have tried traditional therapy and find that it's not enough.
Okay.
That something is stuck. Something hasn't moved. That talking about it hasn't worked. So that's one group. Another group is that talking about it doesn't appeal to them. That maybe they're not as oriented to talking about things. Or maybe they're just more in touch with their bodies. So when I say we work with the body, that just appeals to them. Yeah, so that's kind of the two camps. One is that just talk therapy hasn't worked, and the other is just it appeals to somebody to work with their body, that movement or being in touch with their body is appealing.
So how did you get into this dimension of counseling?
That's also an interesting question.
I go a lot of weird directions.
Yeah. So I had struggled for a long time with food and weight issues.
Okay.
And tried all the usual things that one does when one struggles with food and weight issues. And didn't find them to be very effective. I did the usual roller coaster kind of ups and down things with that. And came across a woman who would be my longtime teacher. So I've been working with her now for 18 years. And then also have now become a coach in her program. It's one of the things I do is I work with her food and weight program. It's one of the specialties that I have. And she works with embodiment. And I went, God, what is this? And I actually, as I was working on my master's, it's when I first found her program. She was looking for candidates to work on, to be participants in her doctoral thesis. And she had a brochure, are you this kind of person? And I looked at it and I went, oh no, I couldn't possibly do that. And I found out later that what I interpreted her looking for wasn't even accurate. But it had to do with this sort of embodiment thing. And I was, oh gosh, no, but I was intrigued. I thought, oh, that's very interesting. And down the road, I started taking some of her workshops. And I thought it was fascinating and I was intrigued. And then farther down the road, I found out about sensorimotor psychotherapy, which is the basis of what I do. And eventually I started their training program, which was a 7-year program, which I became certified in. I became a Certified Advanced Practitioner in. And that's the basis of what I do. And along the way with that, I took Becky's program of coaching, embodiment coaching, and it's those two programs that came together and are very aligned. And it was just, I was intrigued. I was just doing both and intrigued with what is this whole body thing and what is this getting in touch with your body, because I was so out of touch with my body. And I think that people with food and weight issues, that is part of the food and weight issue, is being terribly disconnected from our bodies. I think that's the whole addiction issue, is getting away from actual sensation of our body and searching for a different thing, or trying to cut off from the pain that we're experiencing and trying to get something different. And that what we actually need, the actual remedy to addiction, is connecting with our physical sensation and connecting with our sense of self. We don't know that. We think it's getting away from. The actual remedy is connecting with, and that is actually how I work with addiction. And it's scary for people with addictions, and we need support when we do that. But it is a specialty. Working with addictions is a specialty that I work with. And it's challenging for the person with the addiction to actually make that turn.
So let's talk about addictions for, you hit a hot button with me on that. So let's play with this for a little bit more. So when people are coming to you for addiction support, have they already kicked the habit, or are they wanting to kick the habit?
Either way.
Okay.
Either way. I think when people have not yet stopped using, they're going to need more support than just one person.
And addiction, is that addiction for any addiction? So it's alcohol, it's cigarettes, it's gambling, it's shopping, whatever their addiction might be. So it's not a particular area that you specialize in working with.
Well, I do specialize in food and weight issues, but I work with anything.
Okay. So here's, I'm going to throw my own story into this, because I've been very public with it since I launched You Define Wellness, because it's part of my story here, is that I'm 6.5 years sober. And
congratulations.
Thank you. It is something I am very proud of.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you, you mentioned self. And one of the things that I discovered when the alcohol left me is that I didn't know who I was anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There was no self identification whatsoever. And that's where I struggled the most.
Right.
So, and when I would go to AA meetings and say that is, the alcohol's gone. I don't know who the hell I am anymore.
Right.
Everyone's heads are nodding because everyone feels the same way.
Right.
So I don't know where I'm going with this question. It's kind of rambling, but can you address that a little bit and how you work with someone who is searching for that self?
Right. It's a great question. Yeah. Well, I think it circles back to this mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
It's boy, I just find that so touching. It has to. It's a.
It's okay.
I'm going too fast.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a very gentle process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a fast process. It's just a very gentle process of coming back. Mm-hmm. And just coming back and reconnecting and just bringing a person back to, so what do you notice? When you have that sense of no sense of self, how do you notice that?
Yeah.
Inside. Like what tells you you have no sense of self? How do you feel that?
It's a scary thing for people to go to realize that they don't know their identity.
Right.
And being 50 years old and not knowing who you are. So I am so glad to know that you exist out there. And 6.5 years ago, I wish I knew you.
Right.
Because it did take me 4 years to finally find my purpose in life. And then those 4 years, it was very much a struggle.
Right.
And recognizing that I hated my career. I hated my, what I was doing. And I love the people I was working with. But you're helping people accelerate that process in a very loving way to help them, guide them to helping them find their identity, it sounds like.
And that's just how I would do it, is just by bringing attention back to how do you know that you feel no sense of self? How do you feel it inside? Because that's connecting with just what is. How do you know you don't feel a sense of self? By reconnecting with just how you know that. That is connecting with your sense of self. So just what you said right there is, I hate my job. I hate what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Feeling that is connecting with your sense of self. What you don't like, I don't like what I'm doing. Well, that's connecting with your sense of self. I'm not doing what I love. Well, that gets you a step closer to, well, what would you love? Well, I would love having my own business. I don't like working for someone else. Okay. Well, great. What do you think? What would that business be? Well, maybe I don't like working in insurance. Okay. But I kind of like this business that's in health. Maybe I like that. Okay. So I want to support people's health, so it's getting a step closer. There's being with what is, which is, I don't have a sense of self. Mm-hmm. That is a sense of self.
Yeah.
Right? So we think we don't have a sense of self, but we do have something. And being with what is, we have more than we realize. And when we get in touch with what is, we have a foundation. And then we build on the foundation.
And this is a process that you work with no matter what addiction they have. So yes. Now when people, I'm going to go switch now, but going back to food, because that really is an area that you specialize in. Do they even understand that what they have is an addiction when they come to you? Or they just know that there's a problem, but they haven't put a word on it yet? Or a label?
I think it depends on where people are in the process.
Okay.
Sometimes people go, I get it totally. I know it's an addiction. Absolutely. Because I've been doing this for so long and I totally know where I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you put the word addiction to it and people go, oh my God, yes, that's it. I never used that word, but you're right. And it's the same with relationships. Sometimes I bring up the word addiction and say, you know, I don't want to put a word to it that's not true. So you let me know if that's not the right word, you let me know. And they'll go, oh my God, I never used that word, but that's absolutely the right word. Or they'll say, nope, it's not that. But sometimes put the word to it and people will say, yes, that's totally it. Right. And I never use that word, but yes, that's it.
Yeah, it's an eye-opener when you recognize that that's what it is. So when you're, especially in the area of food addictions, now, are you also working in conjunction with perhaps nutrition coaches to talk about, okay, we recognize this, but now you also need the tools to build a better diet? Or is that something that you are able to incorporate into your counseling?
Well, I work with my teacher, Becky Ocean, who has studied this for, you know, I want to say 20 years, but I've been working with her for so long that I think it's closer to 25 or 30 years that she's been doing this. And she has put together, she has, a part of her PhD thesis was bringing together huge amounts of cutting edge nutritional information. So while that is not her area of expertise, she has brought together just cutting edge nutritional information in this specific area of how do you lose weight? And what are some of the key aspects? And when somebody has specific nutritional needs, you know, I would send them to a nutritionist. I would say, you need specific help from someone who has more knowledge than I have. And I would always incorporate medical personnel when somebody has medical needs. I would never claim to have that information.
Yeah, well, identification of what the problem is huge in the first place. And then that opens up so many other doors.
Right.
Now, on your website, and for everybody on this call, I will be sharing Robin's information on her website and contact information at the end. But you also talk about working with trauma. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So I have some specialized training through Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, through that specific training, specialized training in trauma. And trauma, so there are different ways to work with trauma. In my understanding and through the training I have, trauma lives in the body. So working with trauma, you can work with trauma from the head, from the top down, or you can work with trauma from the bottom up. My understanding through my training is that trauma lives in the body. So working from the bottom up, from the body up, is the most effective way to work with it. So when I work with trauma, we don't work with the story. We don't talk about trauma because that's essentially re-triggering. It just re-traumatizes the person. And so instead, when the trauma is activated, we set the story aside and we work with the body itself. So the way that might look in a session is the trauma gets activated, and the way I see that is I'm looking at the person. So they might get flushed, they might start breathing heavily, they might start shaking, and we'll just say, okay, so let's stop, let's set the story aside and just bring your attention to that shaking. Just notice that shaking. And it's okay. It's exactly what your body needs to do. And what that shaking is the body processing out the physical trauma. It is actually the body letting go of a piece of that trauma. It may not be the whole thing, but it's some piece of trauma actually working its way out. That's exactly what we want to happen. If it can happen that way, that's called sequencing. It's actually sequencing out a piece of the trauma. So if that happens, we want to let it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another thing that can happen with trauma is we're working on a piece of the story, and a person might want to push, or they might want to hit. And if that comes up in the story, that's what's called completing a defensive response. So we want them to complete a defensive response. So we give them the opportunity to complete a defensive response. So I might bring a pillow up or my hand and say, all right, so push, but bring your attention to the push. This is something that they couldn't do at the time. So maybe they were a child at the time and they wanted to push someone away, but they were a child and they couldn't push someone away. Maybe the person was too big and they couldn't push them away. So we're going to give them an opportunity now to push, to complete that defensive response. So it's allowing the body to actually complete that defensive response and allow that trauma piece to complete its sequence. When that happens, a whole thing can move through the body and be done.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I've had something come up several times in the last week to 10 days, and looking for all the different ways where you could be a resource to people. When something comes up multiple times, it's like, okay, there's a reason why, and obviously I need to bring it up with you, is what I see it as. The death of a child.
Mm.
So that is obviously a different type of trauma than perhaps an assault.
Huge though.
Huge. Is that someone who you would be able, because your website doesn't necessarily mention grief.
Oh, yeah.
That is a huge, frustrating thing for a parent to go through. But it sounds like embodied counseling could work really well for someone dealing with that kind of a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And it's a different kind of trauma.
Yeah.
And in that case, as you say, the grief and allowing the grief to move through, grieving, may be the primary thing. There also may be something about orienting. And that's what comes up for me. There might be something about orienting, like the parent might have something going on with, I should have known. Like there was something I should have seen. Like, I don't know what happened, but say I should have seen the child run into the street. If only I had seen, if I had oriented to the child running into the street. So there might be something where there's a head turn, or which is another defensive response, orienting. There might be something where the parent didn't orient to something, and that's the response that didn't happen and needs.
Some would call that guilt, but it's really orienting.
But there may be an orienting response that didn't happen that needs to happen from a trauma standpoint. And there's grieving as well that needs to happen. But from the trauma standpoint, there might be an orienting response that didn't happen that, you're right, is being translated into guilt. But if that orienting response happened, perhaps the guilt could be let go of. And then the grieving could happen.
Yeah. That's really important for me to know. Thank you for sharing that part. So let's talk about the process of counseling for a couple of minutes, because this is one thing that I hear and get pushback from people on. Again, I'm not a healer. I'm a reformed insurance agent. But when I'm meeting with employees now and in the past, one of the things I hear about counseling is, I don't want to go to counseling. It goes on and on and on, because counseling is obviously normally not a one and done type of appointment. So when somebody comes in to work with you, what's the expectation? How do you set that for when there's a conclusion date, or when you're going to know, and how do you communicate that with them?
Well, the first thing I always tell clients is it's up to you. It's always up to you. That's the first thing I always say. It's not up to me. It's always up to you. And I might tell you what I think, but it's always up to you. So choice is always up to the client. I'm never going to keep somebody when they don't want to stay. That's pointless. Mm-hmm. And I don't have, the way I work, I don't have any time frame on therapy. And I don't work in a way that has a certain number of sessions. That's just not the way I work. Mm-hmm. So it's always up to the client. Mm-hmm. And I have clients who have come for a few months, and I have clients who have come for years. So it's just up to whatever is going to work for the client.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Love feeling that power as the individuals, that you're giving it to them. And I think that's really the trend these days, but I'm going back in my mind to, almost 30 years ago, in a little less than that, of going through marriage counseling. And it seemed like it went on and on because we kept finding something else to work on. And it was just finally enough. I need to move on. And I've seen more counselors really make a point of it really is up to you. So you're echoing what I'm hearing out there. And I appreciate that. So I'm going to jump back for a second to trauma, and in an area that it just came to me to ask you this question, so I need to go back to it. So workplace violence is something that we just really don't want to live with, don't want to deal with, and we don't want to be going on, but it has become a fact of life, both workplace violence and in the school, obviously. That's a huge trauma. Mm-hmm. Is that something that, do you have any tips for an employer who's dealing with this situation as to what they need to bring in to their workplace, or what you would recommend, or any words of advice, period?
Wow, what a great question. And I'm kind of laughing inside because I used to be a safety consultant.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I feel like I really ought to have something just right at the tip of my tongue, and I don't. What I would say is to an employer is you ought to have a program in place. Mm-hmm. And at this moment, I don't have that at the tip of my tongue, what that program ought to be. But yeah, I think as an employer, you ought to have something in place. Mm-hmm. And that's really something that should have some kind of follow-up to it.
That's really good to know about the safety side. I hope and pray that our clients never have that issue. The employer.
Absolutely.
But if they do, I want to be in a position to be able to say, we have the resources to bring in for your employees on a group or individual basis.
Yeah.
And knowing that there are people like you that we can tap into to say, Robin, remember that conversation we
Right.
Okay, what would you be doing, and help us make it happen? So,
right.
It's just, unfortunately, it's a fact of life, and we have to be prepared and not be on hindsight all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking, wow, yeah, we really ought to have like a network, and that would be a great thing to develop as a network. Yeah.
I have one.
Denise, I'm thinking we need a network and especially for small employers who aren't going to have a big plan, but just to have a network for small employers and just a program ready. Denise, I'm seeing something to develop.
Well, every time I hear about a workplace shooting, every time I hear about a school shooting, it actually, especially the workplace shootings, I keep coming back to that question of, do we need to develop a program? And then it comes always back to, we need to develop a program.
Yeah.
And, right now what we have is resources with, over 200 locations in Colorado of wellness practitioners that we can call on to say, emergency meeting, we got to pull something together.
Right.
But, that'll be maybe 2019 planning for us, because I just think that it's critical, and that we can bring in all the different resources with all the different modalities to really cater to the needs of the workplace, as opposed to just one singular focus, which is what I do see as the resources right now for an employer to tap into that. It's just a really morbid, non-exciting thing that people want to talk about. I mean, they don't want to, but it's one of those things that we need it before we need it. Does that make sense?
See, and I do think it's exciting. Because that's the world I live in, is you need to have that in place, and you need to be ready for it, so that if anything happens, you minimize the trauma of it. Because really, if something like that happens, if you get people in there right away, the effect on your employees, the effect on everyone involved is so minimized. And that's really the truth of trauma, is that trauma happens because of what happens after. So the truth of trauma is that an event happens, and the same thing happens for two people. One person walks out of it without any effect. Another person walks out and their life has been shattered.
Yeah.
And the reason that those two people had totally different effects, well, part of it may be biology, part of it may be just their inner resources, and part of it is what happened to them afterwards. Did they have support? Did they have people who could listen to their stories, who supported them and said, wow, that was horrible, and you got through it? And part of it is, could they take action? So if we have a sense of agency, we're much more likely not to feel traumatized. If we felt powerless, we're much more likely to feel traumatized. So if we had people who came and helped us through that and gave us a sense of agency, then we're likely to walk out of it feeling like, wow, that was really bad, and I made it, and I'm okay, than if we didn't. So if there's a program in place to get us through, we're likely to come through okay.
So you are convincing me that I need to put this on my things to do list. I may be tapping your brain for this.
And me too. I wrote it down.
Okay, well, we have the resources within You Define Wellness to make it happen and be something that is that caters to the needs at a much deeper level. Not to say that what is not in place doesn't, but we have such a myriad of modalities that we could be bringing in to meet more needs, that I think that there's definitely a need. I hope we never ever have to use this task force,
right?
But it'd be better to have something in place than not have it in place.
Right.
So that's awesome. So at this point in time, I want to open it up for any questions. If you have, if those who are viewing live have any questions, raise your hand, go in the chat box, or just speak up. Any questions? Yes, no? Okay. And what's really wonderful is we have someone on this call live who has experience with active shooter training. So guess what? We're tying you in as well. So we will have something amazing come out of all of this. So at this point, Robin, it's amazing that it goes by so fast, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know, it's fun. So at this point in time, this is where I am showing your website, and we have the trauma up, but with your contact information. So I encourage anyone viewing this webinar to reach out to Robin if you feel that she could help, you want to align with her, or about this task force that we're evidently putting together as well. But Robin, this is where you get to add anything that we haven't covered that we should cover. It's your opportunity to talk for a couple minutes if you wish.
Wow. We've covered so
warn you
much.
about
I don't
that.
know.
Sorry. Is there anything that you want, when you were thinking about this call, that you wanted to make sure that you covered that I didn't ask?
Well, one of the things that I had been thinking about that we didn't cover is one of the things that we do in embodied counseling and embodied living that we didn't touch on is I had been thinking why embodied living, why embodied counseling, that we hadn't touched on. Is that one of the things that comes out of embodiment some of the things that come out of it is a sense of direction, right? So when we look at what does this matter? Why do I want to feel embodied? Why do I want to be more in touch with my body? Is that many people don't have a sense of direction in their life, or a sense of satisfaction, or like I'm looking over here at some of my words I wrote down. Just a sense of purpose and meaning. Mm-hmm. And those are some of the words, some of the importance that I think comes out of being more in our bodies, is that so many people walk around today feeling empty. And I think, again, with addiction, that's one of the biggest issues in addiction, is that sense of emptiness, meaninglessness, purposelessness that people turn to any addiction for. And that the remedy to that we don't know about until we start connecting more with our bodies, and which then in turn becomes connecting more with ourselves, is that we start having more of a sense of self, and having more connection with our own sense of direction and our own sense of purpose. And we don't know that when we start doing it. And when I work with clients, I get a lot of pushback of, why am I doing this? Why do you want me to connect with my sensation, for God's sakes? And the longer they do it, I say, just hang with me. Just try it. Just see what it's like to just connect with your sensation. And when they do it, they go, oh, okay. All right, well, that feels kind of good. They start off with, it feels good, and so they're willing to do it because it feels good. But over time, it becomes a feeling of satisfaction, and a feeling of fullness, and a feeling of groundedness. And then it starts to be a feeling of satisfaction, and a feeling of more, how do I say it? Accomplishment, but more than that, like I'm trying to find a word for it. Like if you put beans in a bean bag, like it's like a feeling of more fullness, more wholeness. And then we start looking at choices. People are trying to make choices, and then they find that they have their own sense of direction. Instead of looking to somebody else or something else for direction, they're asking me for, well, what do I do? And I say, I can't tell you what to do. It's your life. So let's look to yourself for that sense of direction. And the direction comes from, check how your body responds. How, you have this choice. How does it feel? Ooh, it feels, kind of gooey and sticky. And how does this choice feel? Oh, it feels light and open and airy. So which one feels better? Oh, well, that becomes really clear. Right? So, okay, now you have your answer. So that's why that's why I think embodiment is why I find embodiment is so important, because it gives us all those things that we want. We want wholeness, we want satisfaction, we want direction, we want purpose, we want meaning, we want joy. It gives us a sense of joy. People say, I want to be happy, I want to be joyful. Well, what is that? It's a sense in our bodies. we feel joy. We feel happiness. It's not something that's out there. It's what we feel. So that's why I find that this work for me is so wonderful, because I get to then share that and be with people who then find it for themselves.
Wow.
There we go.
That's a good way to end this. So I am going to end it. And I want to say thank you to you, Robin. This has been fun. And we went a lot of different directions, and I really appreciate it. But I also want to say thank you to everyone who is watching this video and participating live or on our YouTube posting. So thank you for being with us. If Robin can help you, if you want to work with her, reach out and contact her. And of course, you can always reach out and contact me as well. So I appreciate you all, and wish you all a fantastic weekend here.